Now this talk may involve some participation, so get amped up for that. My name is Ed Finkler, and I'm going to be talking about some stuff about mental health in the developer community today. And so thanks, this is a big crowd here, very exciting to me. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm a dad and I'm a husband, a developer type. I have been for quite a long time, maybe 20 years or so. Occasionally a musician, kind of a big ultra nerd type. I got a lot of nerdy interests. But I also have a mental illness, or really a couple. But I'm just here as a person. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't have a training in therapy or something like that. I am certified in something called mental health first aid. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'm really here about what it's like to have a mental illness from my perspective, and to talk about how that impacts our society and how that impacts our community. And we'll get into that some, how mental health is perceived in our community. So I want to do a little informal survey. This is the part where you may have to respond, and I would appreciate it if you did. So I got a question for you, everybody. How many of you, please raise your hand if you do, need glasses or contacts or some sort of thing of that nature? Okay, so you require some kind of visual aid device that allows you to see properly. I would like you to raise your hand, again, if you're afraid to tell people about it. I saw some smartass there in the back raise his hand for a second. And have you ever had someone ask you, or just say to you, maybe you're not trying hard enough. Maybe you should try harder to see without that crutch. Or have you tried squinting? Maybe if you squinted at it, it would work better. Couldn't you just do that? So no one raised their hand, so I'm saying no. Now, I've had a father and my brother both had type 2 diabetes, which is scary for me. But I'm curious, I'm going to ask basically the same kind of question about that. Now, you don't have to say if you have it, that's not really relevant for it, but I'm curious if you'd be willing to talk about it with, say, a colleague or a friend that you know. Would you be willing to talk about diabetes with that person? If it came up in conversation, you might not intro that, Please raise your hand if you would. Okay, so a lot of people, not everybody, some's a little reserved. It might depend on the conversation. Maybe I don't want to bring that up as a lead into how was your day, how about diabetes? Cancer. My brother passed away from cancer this year. But we talk about it a lot. We see it a lot in society. We see it sort of in popular culture. A lot of people talking about cancer, different kinds of cancer. Now, I'm curious. I'm going to ask that same question I did about diabetes. If you were in a position that came up in a conversation with, say, a colleague, friend, would you have that? Would you feel uncomfortable? Would you be afraid to discuss it? I'd like you to raise your hand if you'd be afraid to discuss it. Nobody in here. I'm surprised. Now, I know half of you are not paying attention. That's okay. I understand. You got plenty to eat. That's all right. No, I'm just teasing. Probably fairly comfortable talking about it. Not the most fun subject in the world, but it's something that we deal with. Now, I'm curious. I'd like you to raise your hand if you would feel comfortable talking with, first off, your boss about mental health or a mental health issue. Raise your hand if you would. Okay, so a few of you. That's great. That's great. How about a colleague? Okay, more of you. That's awesome. That's very good. Or how about a friend or a family member? A few more hands. That's great. I'm glad to hear it. That's awesome. I think it's interesting, though. Keep that in mind, and some of the differences we have with how comfortable we are talking about and expressing certain kinds of things, devastating things, diabetes, cancer, compared to mental health issues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself here. What the diagnoses I have are. Now, there's two primary ones that I deal with. One is generalized anxiety disorder. And that that essentially means that I get anxious about things, a number of different things, not sort of one very particular thing. And it's normal to get anxious about things, but the degree to which I get anxious about isn't appropriate given the situation typically. So I often get sort of afraid to go into situations where I don't exactly know the rules. I'm really uncomfortable taking public transportation for that system, especially in a new city. There's a number of things like that that I get uncomfortable with if I feel like I'm not in I don't understand sort of what's going to be like. I've stood outside of bars that I knew my friends were in, and because I didn't know which door to go into, I would like get in my car and go home because I was so uncomfortable with that. I feel like I get into a situation like that, I feel like everybody's staring at me, I'm going to screw up, I'm going to do the wrong thing. That is really, really afraid. And when I say it's scary for me, it's not kind of a thing where it's like, oh, that's kind of frightening, but I can push through it, it's fine. Sometimes it is debilitatingly scary, and oftentimes has very strong physical manifestations. Oftentimes my chest gets very tight, feels like I have a knot right here under my sternum. I'll get sick to my stomach. I poop a lot. Used to have IBS, and that was a really hard thing, tied very closely to my anxiety. And so that's the thing that I deal with really all the time. I'm worrying about that, particularly worrying about the future, worrying about things that I've done in the past, things like that. I also have something called adult ADHD, and I say adult because oftentimes those things have been associated with children, and for a while it was kind of like, well, is that a real thing, or do kids always just grow out of that? No, it's a real thing in adults too. And there's a couple different variants of ADHD or ADD kinds of things, but with ADHD, there's a couple variants of it. I have trouble focusing on tasks oftentimes. I tend to get distracted because my thought processes are going off in a different place. I tend to avoid less appealing tasks, but not like, I don't really feel like doing it. More like, I really avoid it to the point where it is destructive and non-productive. I tend to get frustrated very easily. And, I've learned to cope with that over the years, but still, I tend to get frustrated more quickly often than other people will. My emotions tend to be intense. That goes along with that frustration. I tend to get emotional quickly, and I tend to get strong emotions quickly compared to what seems like other people. They can come on really fast and hard to control. And I am really, really, really good at constructing bad outcomes and hyper-focusing on them. And that really ties in a lot with that anxiety, and that anxiety and ADHD really play off one another. Now, I take some medication to help with that, and I also see a therapist every 2 weeks. But the meds that I take are Lexapro, which is an SSRI. It's a lot like Prozac was the original SSRI on the market. Buspar, which is an anti-anxiety medication, Strattera, which is a medication for ADD and ADHD. It's the only medication on the market, in the US at least, that is not an amphetamine. Everything else that they give you to treat ADD and ADHD is an amphetamine. And as my psychiatrist who prescribes these medications to me says, somebody with an anxiety disorder should probably not take amphetamines. Not a great idea. And then I also take Klonopin, kind of on an as-needed basis, and that is a tranquilizer. It kind of calms me down, and it's similar to something like Xanax or something like that. And like I said, I also see a therapist about every 2 weeks. I talk about how and why I do the things that I do. Why do I have the reactions that I have? Why do I take actions based on those feelings that I have? And come up with strategies to address those things. And it's helped a lot. Had a lot of good success, and not just me, lots of people have had good success with a couple of different therapies, especially related to anxiety disorders. The problem with this stuff, I think, and this is an experience that I had for pretty much my entire childhood and well into adulthood, and probably only started really going away in the last few years, was that I felt alone and not like anybody else. And as I've talked to other people when I give this talk, I hear those same kinds of things over and over. That they feel like they're the only person who's having this problem. It seems like everyone else is coping okay. What's wrong with me? Why can't I cope in society? Why can't I do the things that other people seem to not have trouble doing? And ultimately, I know I felt this way. Sometimes still do feel this way. That something's broken with me and it's never going to be right. That I'm simply incapable of being productive in society. That I'm incapable of doing my job properly. I'm always going to do something wrong. Things are going to blow up. I'm not going to be able to handle it. I'm going to have some kind of big episode and freak out, and it's not going to work, and it's all going to go terribly. And that is an awful feeling. That is a feeling of separation. That is a feeling of utter loneliness when you're surrounded by people, because you feel as if there's something fundamental to you that's wrong that nobody else shares. The thing is, there's actually lots of people like that, and I'm going to get more into that and how this affects us. How does this affect our society in general? Well, most studies that you look at, some in government, some other words give statistics about this kind of stuff, track it at about 20% of the population, at least in the U.S., but this is, I think, fairly consistent across most, at least, developed nations, whatever you want to call that. About 1 in 5 adults have a mental disorder any 1 year in the U.S. That's 20%. That is a very, very high number. That is very prevalent. Anxiety disorders are the most common. Depression, I think, is next. You deal with things, psychoses, and you deal with things like eating disorders and other things that go into that, personality or disorders, things of that nature, mood disorders. And they all fall into that. But 20% is a huge number. And one of the things to talk about, I'm going to talk about this for a second, the level of disability that it causes, because I think there's some perception oftentimes that these things are not actually, well, it's not really a big deal. How does it really affect you? Especially for people who don't deal with it, who, like when they think of being anxious, it's at, say, for this level, and they don't realize that for this person it's more like at this kind of level. The comparison I have often is that, and you talk about appropriate and inappropriate reactions at a time, it's very appropriate to have a very, very, very strong reaction and be very anxious and have a very strong stress response, say, if a lion is going to eat you. That is a built-in normal reaction that we have if we feel extremely threatened. Most people in our society today don't experience that. I would say probably most of the people here at this table have not had an experience of a lion coming at them. However, the thing is that for people with, say, severe anxiety disorders, it feels that way when they're in a place like, I'm at a party and I don't know anybody. And they have that kind of reaction, that extreme reaction at a time where it isn't appropriate, but they're still having that. So if we talk about level of disability, and this is stuff that I got from a study done by the World Health Organization. Now they compared moderate depression to being similar to multiple sclerosis or severe asthma in terms of level of disability. They compared severe depression to quadriplegia. How debilitating that is. And I'll tell you, past few days, I've had some tough times and I've been working through some stuff. And I have had some really strong anxiety and depression stuff going on with me. And I was holed up in my bedroom, crying, unable to do anything, unable to get out of bed entirely. It is severely debilitating, and it is an awful, suffering experience to have to go through. Now, in that World Health Organization study, they talk about disease burden, which is this metric they use to sort of measure the impact of different diseases and certain kind of disorders that they see. And it's basically premature death combined with years lived with a disability. You try to get a measure out of that, of what that burden is. on what burden these things cause. And in that World Health Organization study called the Global Burden of Disease, they said that the burden of mental disorders was the largest of all disorder categories in North America. That's more than cardiovascular disease, and that's more than cancer. Now, the mortality rate is significantly lower than those other disorders. But years lived with the disability, that impact that it has day after day, month after month, year after year, was significantly higher. And a quote from that, in all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are among the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults age 15 and over. That's an enormous amount. That's an enormous impact that simply that category of disease, mental disorders, is having on a global scale. And we look at the economic cost. This is from this PDF, which I linked down to the bottom if you're curious to look at. Mental health conditions, they're the second leading cause of workplace absenteeism. And workers with depression, again, just one type of mental disorder, they lose about 5.6 hours per week due to their disability, or due to their disorder. Call it what you will. Workers without depression, they lose about 1.5 hours per week. That's a significant difference. A significant difference in terms of lost time. In general, depression itself causes $43.7 billion in absenteeism from work, lost productivity, and direct treatment. So it has a real economic cost. So I think about that when I think about how willing we are to talk about it. And I'm going to get into this and get into it a little bit as it deals with tech and how it deals with the community that I participate in, primarily open source based tech. And get some numbers out of that. Now, I did a survey in August and September of 2014. This is just people in the U.S., and this is just non-self-employed people. I adjusted that because there's some differences in how healthcare works and how people who are self-employed would handle those kinds of things. But it sort of gives you a snapshot in terms of how people view mental health in the workplace. So the first one question I asked was, do you feel that your employer takes mental health as seriously as physical health? And I want you to remember, these are people working in tech. These are developers. These are folks like you who work in this industry. And 49% said yes, that's great. But over half said no, or they don't know. Probably they don't know because no one has ever talked to them about it. And I see that common thread a lot. Second one, do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? And first, let's look at physical. If you have a physical health condition, over 3/4 of people said no, it wouldn't have any negative consequence. Maybe it was 19%. I guess it depends somewhat on the physical, on the physical issue. And yes was only 4%. Might depend on the job they do. Depends. Let's look at mental health. So if you had a mental health issue, only about 1/3 of people were able to say no. And that went from 4% to almost 1/4 of the entire respondents said yes, I believe there would be a negative consequence if I discussed this in my workplace with my employer. Maybe it was 41%. So you're talking about 2/3 of people say maybe or yes. That's an enormous difference. Would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? I get this question a lot anecdotally. People talking to me about their concerns about how do they assess how an employer is going to handle and deal with their mental health issues that they deal with every day. Physical health issues, would they bring that up in an interview? No said 44%, maybe said 44%, yes was 12%. So probably not something you lead with, and sometimes it might not be relevant to your to the situation at all. With mental health, no was 85%. Maybe it was 14%, only 2% said yes. That's a very, very significant difference, and I think indicates that people are simply afraid to discuss this, particularly in an interview. I might also add that it is illegal to fire or not hire somebody on the basis of something like this unless it interferes with their ability to do the job. It is absolutely illegal under U.S. federal law. But it's also almost impossible to disprove it. People might say, oh, well, you know, they're not a culture fit, something like that. They'll find some reasons for it not to work out. So, current employees, do you know the options for mental health care your employer provides? Yes was 40%, which is okay, but really not great. No was 32%. A third of people don't know what options for mental health care that their employer provides, and not sure is 27%, which kind of tells me that's almost as good as a no. I know maybe there's something, but I don't really know what it is. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? That's a key part of addressing wellness. A common theme that you'll see with especially larger corporations trying to keep healthcare costs down, trying to keep people healthy and productive. How do you find out about health issues? How do you get help for health issues? Those are commonly known for physical stuff. For mental health, no was 38%, don't know was 37%. Only about a quarter could say yes. That's pretty low considering the prevalence of mental health issues and considering the impact that they have on productivity. Is your anonymity protected if you choose to take advantage of mental health or substance abuse treatment resources? 30% said yes. The rest simply don't know. They don't know if their anonymity is protected. By the way, their anonymity has to be protected, and that again is covered by federal law. They don't know if it is or not. I've certainly heard horror stories of managers bringing up stuff outside of when they should, in either inadvertent or deliberate ways. But I would say most of the time it's a matter of not doing what they're supposed to do because they don't know, or they just don't. They don't explain to people what's going to happen, and the expectation is going to be fear, especially with something like this. How easy is it for you to take medical leave for a mental health condition? It seems to me that you should be able to, if I've got a cold, you can't come in, really not feeling up to it. I cannot be productive today. You take a day off, that's normal. So you can feel better and be productive. How easy is it for you to take a mental health condition if I'm having something that's debilitating on that day and I can move past it, but I really kind of need to maybe be out of the office for a little bit? Over half of people simply don't know. Why? Probably because it was never brought up. Because we don't talk about it. Despite how prevalent it is, we simply don't talk about it. Now, there's a few folks that say it's easy or somewhat easy. They've probably been through that. Probably their employer has discussed those things with them. Difficult, somewhat difficult, is about 14%. But the majority don't know because it just doesn't get talked about. Again, despite how prevalent it is and despite how impactful it is. The key thing here is sick workers don't work, and you can be sick with a mental health issue, which often impacts you physically, or you can be sick with something which is purely a physical issue. They don't work, or they're significantly less productive. A telling thing is that only 41% of people in the U.S. with a mental disorder receive professional help in a given year. That means there's a lot of people out there who don't get help. Now, we're in a situation where probably a lot of us are better off than many folks and have options available to us. We probably have health insurance, or we have enough money where we could probably seek out something. But the fact is that people don't get help for these kinds of things. We're just talking about depression here. Half the people who seek help for depression wait 8 years or more. That's 8 years suffering from it, when they don't have to, when they could be getting help, and they don't. And the longer they delay help, the more difficult recovery can be. And there's good evidence that people with mental health problems are more likely to seek help if someone close to them suggests it. And the people who we probably spend most of our time with are the people at work. So we're going to talk a little bit about making your workplace a safer place for people with mental health issues. And there's a few steps in here, and we're working on, I a little bit, and two folks who are far more educated and better at this than I am are working on a document that we can hand out to folks. We can hand to a company and say, these are steps that you can take. And this outlines this in detail, but I want to go over sort of these 6 things that we've identified and get you thinking about that. I'm curious, how many of you here are a CEO, CTO, some kind of C-level? You're going to need to raise your hand so that we can shoot you down later. Okay, all right, I got a couple of them. Got a couple of them in here. The key thing that you need to do really, first off, more than anything, is you have to get buy-in from C-level. And any kind of organization, the values of that organization come from the top down. What you guys choose to value is what your company and your employees will value. So you have to meet with those execs. And you have to keep in mind, folks like that are oftentimes want to do the right thing. They want to help their employees, but sometimes they're scared. They don't know how to handle this. It might be they've been given advice from, say, HR or somebody else that says, oh, you know what, you should be super careful because if they say anything, you could get sued if something goes wrong. And I've heard stories about that. People being shuttled where they said your guy goes and talks to his manager and says, hey, I've got this going on. And his manager goes, wait, don't say anything more to me. You need to go over to HR and talk to them about it. I can't hear this. And can you imagine how that would make somebody feel who's probably scared to talk about it already? But we have this great fear that we're so afraid of interacting with it and really trying to help people, and that is somehow going to backfire and destroy the company on it. I don't buy that. I think you can do it in a fine way, a legal way. You have to know those laws involved in it, but you absolutely can help your employees. You do not have to be deferential like that, as long as they can respect you and you respect them and their privacy. So you got to meet with those execs and educate them on these kinds of issues. You share research, you share legal information, and you share ways to support employees. And those are values that you have to establish. Values like discouraging work hour martyrdom. How many of you work more than 40 hours a week? How about 50? You work more than 50. Is it expected of you? Good. I know plenty of places where it is expected of you. The fact is that you have to be really careful. There's a lot of evidence that working over 40 hours of productivity goes down significantly. And the second thing is that working more than that time also can have a debilitating physical and mental toll on you. You have to enforce vacation before it's needed. You don't want people to burn out and then have to take a vacation. You want to be sustainable, and a sustainable workplace and culture doesn't overwork its employees. You have to, there's other ways to support employees that C-levels need to do. Make sure that there's coverage for mental health that's equal to the physical health coverage that you have. If you provide that, that's absolutely essential. There needs to be transparency in the hiring process. When you're interviewing people and you're discussing things like this, be open with them about how you handle mental health issues. Because 20% of the people you work with right now are dealing with it at this moment. Not like, well, it might come up. It's happening right now. They are dealing with it right now. And they're probably afraid to talk to you about it. Transparency in that hiring practice, discussing company practices right up front, and making sure everybody knows them. And then talking about wellness strategies, which we'll talk about in a second, but talk about and establish those wellness strategies so that people know how to take care of themselves a little bit better. The second thing I really encourage, particularly with all supervisors and all managers, how many people here are a manager or supervisor of any kind, sort of a lead, a team, something like that? Please raise your hand. That would be great if you do. Okay. I really strongly believe that anybody who deals with and interacts with people on a regular basis, which most of us do, should take mental health first aid. It provides explicit training for supporting mental health needs. It does not aid you in necessarily diagnosing people. It does not turn you suddenly into a psychologist or psychiatrist. What it does is it trains you to identify potential crisis situations and how to help with people with that. And even if they're not in a crisis situation, it teaches you how to listen empathetically and respond supportively in a positive way that's going to encourage people to get help. It's really key that you do that and understand how to do those things. Because again, it is not the case that, well, if it comes up. The fact is that people are dealing with it right now, in your workplace right now. It is very cheap. It cost me $50 out of pocket to do it. I've seen cities and programs that have grants that you can do it for free. I'm sure there are places around here in Atlanta, numerous places that you could get this training done. And it's available in 22 different countries. And I guarantee you're going to use this way more than traditional first aid, which is an awesome thing to know. It is important if somebody drowns, so you know how to do CPR, stuff like that. But I guarantee you're going to use this every day because it teaches you about listening empathetically. It teaches you how to respond supportively. That's stuff that is going to involve you're going to use in every interaction that you're in. The third thing is knowing your local resources. It's important where you are to research community resources and compile them in one place. The reason why I emphasize this is because there's not like a Yelp for this kind of stuff where you can be like, I'm here in a strange town and I want the best Korean barbecue. It doesn't work like that. While there are registries of, say, for example, oftentimes psychiatrists or psychologists in an area, they usually or an area or nationally, they usually don't include things like peer support groups, include things like other kinds of options that you have. Which of these places work on sliding scales for people who maybe can't afford out-of-pocket expenses, things like that. There are often lots of options for people that they simply don't know about in a community. So it is key that you contact someplace, like say NAMI.org, if there's a chapter in your area, or you talk to mentalhealthamerica.net, there's a chapter in my town, and they know tons of resources, and you can call them up and they will say, oh yeah, this is somebody who maybe you want to talk to. This is a group that meets these 3 times a week. They can nail that stuff for you, and they can say, this is a good hospital to go to. This isn't such a good hospital to go to. They don't have the resources. They don't necessarily handle you as well there. It's important. Get that stuff together. Compile it in one place where everybody can access it. Knowing your coverage is really, really essential, and making mental health coverage transparent. It's not enough to put it in a handbook that is 200 pages long and it's on page 83 and, I handed them the handbook, right? Doesn't work like that. You need to actively disclose and educate on what things are available to people. You have to do a company disclosure benefits plan. Give people an opportunity to meet with insurance reps to answer questions. That's really essential. And it shows your commitment. And actively engaging and educating, and those are really 3 areas: and awareness, resources, and promotion of wellness. Awareness is really talking about what it's like to have these kinds of issues. So I did a little bit of awareness at the beginning. This talk used to be just an awareness talk, and it's kind of expanded beyond that. There's a group, Prompt. You can go to mhprompt.org. The whole reason that organization exists is to get people to go to conferences and go to workplaces and talk to people about mental health issues specific to the tech industry. That's the only reason they exist. They have helped fund me on many trips to go to different places. And it is a great organization. And if you're not in contact with them, please get in contact with them. If you have a user group, if you've got a conference you put on, if you've got, say, I want somebody to come in and talk to my employees on lunch, these are the folks to talk to. This is exactly what they do. And even just that awareness step is going to make a huge difference. It's going to get people talking and thinking about things in a different way. Resources. Those things can be those local resources I talked about. Lots of online resources. There's tools. There's lots of good phone apps and stuff like that help with anxiety issues and things like that. There's lots of things like that. DevPressed is a good, it's a forum specifically for developers to talk about mental health issues they're experiencing. It's also a Slack channel. I can't remember what it is right now, but I'm in the Slack channel regularly. We talk about mental health stuff. So an app called Checkup app that I still have not sat down to check out, but it is an open source tool that maybe you might want to look at. But bring those resources together, make sure everybody's aware of them. And it's not enough to just kind of pop out an email. You got to keep talking about this stuff. Present it in different forums. And promotion of mental wellness. And these are really life skills. Ooh, I hate that word. Life skills. I'm such a cynic. To prevent illness. And so that's stuff like educating about psychology and psychiatry in a public forum. Maybe have somebody come in and talk about it. Have somebody locally from Mental Health America or NAMI talk about it. Teaching techniques and best practices. For those are things with like dealing with burnout and stress, teaching mindfulness, being present. Those things are a big part of dialectical therapy, which is becoming more and more prevalent treatment for anxiety disorders. All that stuff is really just, don't get too weird, it's essentially about Buddhist meditation stuff. But it's still really helpful and still really cool. Peer-to-peer support groups are really essential. Do you have an opportunity, especially in a larger group, do you have like a group of folks who maybe meets and talks about some of this stuff? It is immensely helpful and powerful to be able to talk to your peers about this stuff openly and know that they're going to respect you and accept you. And then promoting these proactive practices, which are not silver bullets. They do not fix you. They do not solve all your problems for you. But they do help, and they do help stave off some of this stuff. Things like exercising, things like having good nutrition, eating well, making sure you eat regularly, getting enough rest is essential. Making sure people are socially included. If you see people who are kind of on the outside, don't hang out with folks a lot, that's something that's a problem. People tend to be social animals. And if they are, for some one reason or another, not comfortable with your group, there's something going on, and you should maybe, you don't want to be too forceful about it, but that's an issue. And peer support, like I talked about. Having the people around you be supportive, giving that support, making sure that people understand actively, not passively, but actively that they're supported and cared about. And the sixth thing is something we kind of added recently. One of the things that we found is, and I was speaking with a friend of mine who is working on that documentation we're going to try to get a handout as sort of a how-to to make your workplace safer. And when we were first having conversations, she talked to me about the survey that I did, and I was like, yeah, I know, I asked some of the wrong questions, I didn't word them well, I knew there was a lot of problems with it. And she says, yeah, but there's really a ton of good stuff in here, and basically nobody has done research on this. Not in this community. Not in the tech community, not to see are certain kinds of mental health issues more prevalent in the tech community. Anecdotally, it seems like maybe that is the case, but we don't actually know. And we don't necessarily know what are the best ways to deal with that in this community that we all participate in. So further research is needed to examine the prevalence of illnesses and best practices within the community. We just don't know how the tech industry differs from, say, the general population or other industries. So supporting that kind of research that we're trying to do is really essential. I don't have anything to identify right now except the stuff I've done because basically nobody's doing it. So if that is something you're interested in, you might drop me a line. So what's the upside? And I'll go through these things kind of quick because I know we don't have a lot of time here. But basically talk about, I want to do all this stuff and that's nice, but what is the upside for businesses who do this kinds of stuff? Well, the first thing you're going to get is higher productivity and motivation because employees feel valued and secure. People do better in that environment. They work more effectively when an employer demonstrates a commitment to their well-being. You're going to get reduced absenteeism. One, because primarily workplace stress and the issues that it causes are a major cause of absenteeism. So helping employees manage their stress and their overall mental health boosts productivity and reduces absenteeism. You get health insurance cost containment because if you institute health and wellness programs that include mental health, most of the ones I've seen don't, or they do it on a very small level. They help hold down health insurance, which keeps getting more and more expensive for most people. Loyalty and retention. Businesses with mental health friendly practices have documented remarkably low turnover rates. That's very significant. That makes a difference. Why? Because they feel valued and secure. They feel like the company gives a crap about them. So you save money doing that. Everybody knows that it costs so much money to train people up and get them on there. You want to retain employees. Well, this helps you do that. You get to hire and promote the most qualified people by openly supporting those mental health friendly practices. I will tell you that this sounds like a humble brag. It's really not. But I've generally, when I've been looking for a job in the past several years, people have come to me to talk to me about it. And I have not had to do a big job search. And I'm very lucky in that respect. But I filter out companies actively by saying right up front, what are your policies on this stuff? This is something I deal with. And I'm not going to work for a company that gives me kind of a half-assed answer on it. I'm not interested in working for that company. So I don't think I'm alone in that. And diversity, acceptance, and respect in the workplace. Embracing diversity includes people who live with mental illnesses and who are not what you would call neurotypical. In becoming more inclusive, businesses can both thrive and they can set standards for others. There's good evidence that diversity helps. I actively think that this makes you a better workplace, and you're going to work better if you do this stuff. So we did a campaign because money from the Prompt had to change around some stuff. I talked about that organization before, and I was getting a lot of travel help from them. Prompt had to, some of their funding moved around, and they had to spend some time figuring out where to get money for that stuff. Which, by the way, it's a great organization, and if you believe in this stuff and want to raise awareness, give them some money. But I had to do my own campaign to go around and go to places like this. A lot of places don't necessarily cover all your expenses, and you have often additional expenses like, well, travel and airfare, even or travel and hotel. If that's all covered, you still have also other expenses that go along with that. So this year needed to do fundraising again to pay for travel. I had done a little bit 2 years ago and did this. So our goal was $5,000. Did that on an Indiegogo campaign like I had done a couple of years ago. So I said $5,000, which was a lot, which was just slightly under what we had gotten last time around. And our time to that goal, the time when we reached that goal, was 2 hours. And the total raised after the time was up, 30 days. It was actually 45 for some reason, but it was basically 30. We raised $13,600, which was really, really amazing. So I got a ton of money, and a ton of people said they believed in me to be able to come out and talk about this because it's important and it matters. Because it does matter. It's affecting us in a huge way. And particularly in this industry, how do we figure out how to deal with it? And this is more money than I expected to get. With this extra money, we're working on things like that documentation. I can actually pay some people, maybe not their usual going rate, but I can pay some people for their time to actually work on this stuff who normally would just have to be a volunteer kind of deal for making tech workplaces safer for folks with mental health issues. So I need your help. I need you to talk about this stuff. It doesn't mean you need to get up and yell and embarrass yourself in front of 700 people or whatever like I'm doing right now. But it means that you need to talk about it maybe with your friends, maybe with your colleagues, things like that. Talk about it, share, learn. And do that face-to-face or email, post it on Twitter or Facebook. So do it now, or maybe in a second, but do it soon, please. If there's anything I've shown here, any of these URLs or messages or words have had some kind of impact on you, have made you think, maybe I need to think about that a little bit differently. Or shit, maybe that sounds like me. Do something about it. There's videos, slides, and resources up on my website, funkatron.com/OSMI. And that's all CC licensed. You can use it all you want. You can show it to people at lunch. You can send it all around. You can use materials in there as part of stuff you want to put together. If you want to give donations, which you are doing ongoing, go to j.mp OSMI 2015. I want to thank some people specifically, Camille Wilson, Joanna Wu, Jerry Cody, Jennifer Kulian. All these people have had a major impact on this campaign, have done things like design work, have done things like given me lots of feedback on what I've been doing. That's made this a better talk and made it possible for me to be here. I also want to thank, and they're not a sponsor, I'm not going to make a huge deal out of this, but this is the company I work for, Graph Story. If these guys weren't supportive of what I'm doing, I wouldn't be here. But they let me take time to go do this because they think it matters. And it's not, they don't like, hey, maybe you could kind of chill out on that. We can give you 10 days, but that's it. No, they don't complain when I take this time to do it. And that is really, really great of them. And it makes an enormous difference when you have a supportive employer who helps you out with this stuff. So without their support, I could not be here. This is a list of all the people who donated, and I said I'd make a wall of awesome for everybody who did, and here it is. And I'm really, really proud that all those people, and humbled that all those people thought that this was important enough for me to talk about. So thanks for listening. You can go again, funkatron.com/OSMI, donations are JMP, OSMI 2015. We're kind of late. I probably don't want to do any questions right now. I'm going to be around for a couple hours more, so if you want to talk to me, I'd say come up and talk to me. So I'll be around or out back there. So thank you for the time. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it.